bathrooms, no grab bars, but there is also a bathroom here with grab bars behind that door. There's a quiet space up here. You get there the same way you get to the bathrooms. If you need a break, lie down, whatever, you can go in there. The UKS staff is here to help. Maybe the UKS staff can raise a little hand. We're all wearing a yellow button. We've made different seating options available, as you can see. Please feel free to switch between seating as you want. Maybe you want to have a little lie down. There's a yoga mat, there's some blankets. You can sit however you want, stand up, do what you want. If you need to move around, rest, twitch, pace, not make eye contact, whatever, know that you're welcome here. We have 2 staff contacts for uncomfortable stuff. We haven't figured out a good title for this. Ethical contact, uncomfortable stuff contact. Those 2 contacts are Maria and Mira. They're in the back, so if something happens, if there's anything specific you need, you can let them know or ask them. I forgot to say hello to everyone watching from home. Looking directly into the camera. We're testing this out today, closed captioning. It's the first time we do it, so bear with us if there are any issues, but hopefully it should work here in the space and at home on the stream. The recording of this will not be made public, but can be available for research purposes, then you can email us and ask. And before I give the word to Martina, I'm just going to do the driving rules for conversation and debate events under the auspices of UKS. So please interpret each other's statements to the best of their intentions. Please do not attribute opinions to one another. Please avoid personal attacks. Please avoid master domination techniques eller härskartekniker. Please listen to and acknowledge personal experience. Please talk to, not about people. And please respect the right to define one's own group affiliation and identity. That's all. Thank you so much for being here. Martina Petrelli.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us both here in person and online. I have some notes with me because microphone plus streaming felt a little bit too much to improvise. Let's see if I manage to follow them. I do not work at UKS. I work as a curator and cultural worker at Atelier Kunstnerforbundet. That is a studio space and collective and infrastructural experiment located inside of Kunstnerforbundet. That is one of the oldest artist-owned and artist-run institutions in Norway that was established in 1910. The atelier was established in 2018 when the top 2 floors of the building were freed from their rentals by Kari Schippervold and Kjersti Solbakken at the time. And the reason that UKS and Atelier Kunstnerforbundet have come together in a collaboration is because of the common interests in infrastructural theories and practices that are embedded in both institutions that are dedicated to artists. At the Atelier in 2020, Bassam El-Baroni gave a presentation while he was preparing for the book Between the Material and the Possible. There is a report that came out in 2021, commissioned to Merete Jonviks, that wrote about the first years of existence of the Atelier. And I would say that later on, in the past years, there has been the marking of World AIDS Day on 1st of December on the occasion of the traditional Christmas sales exhibition at Atelier Kunstnerforbundet and inside of the gallery space of Kunstnerforbundet. And So for those online, the reason we're laughing is because on the live transcript screen, Kunstnerforbundet comes up as Kingston Food That. At UKS, the interest on infrastructure might have been apparent in the past year through the changes that are being made in the artistic program that aims to mirror a focus on curatorial processes that are both collective and experimental, as well as the reading group Close Readings that was initiated with a focus on developing an understanding of infrastructural critique, and last autumn, Kaja Breikan's master thesis on women's representation in UKS between its establishment in 1921 and 1971. All of these projects that I've been mentioning from both institutions have documentation that is available online that you can either find yourself on the World Wide Web or come get in touch with us tonight or later on if you'd like to have more information about it. And I'm very grateful for the collaboration between institutions in a time of economic cuts to culture in the cultural scene, and the topic is unfortunately very actual, as one could read in today's article by Andreas Breivik in Klassekampen with the title Generös kunst I en gjerrig tid, or Generosity in a Time of Scarcity, that commented on the ongoing threats to the infrastructure of cultural buildings, artistic and curatorial education, artist stipends, and the programming of small and medium institutions, both in the visual arts field and within theater. Solidarity is a word that has become a buzzword lately, but I believe it is a community of both feelings and actions that are needed in the privileged nation state of Norway and absolutely necessary in the acknowledgement of the multiple and ongoing genocides we share our life with. The art role is, in the end, a construct that needs to be responsible in the process of cultural growth, otherwise, I believe, at risk of becoming obnoxious to the world that generates its very existence. Tonight, we will hear about some of these constructs through the presentation of the newly published anthology, Infrastructure Aesthetics. Co-editor Cecilie Ullerup Schmidt and contributing author Line Ellegaard from the Arts as Forum Research Center at the University of Copenhagen will present for about 20 minutes each, and then there will be a 45 minutes open conversation moderated by Sara LOOKOFSKY, director of Kunstneres Hus. And as a small memo, on Friday, Kunstneres Hus has a fundraising event party that will go in supporting the renovation of their important historical building. For those of you that are in Oslo and that are wanting to participate, or maybe gift an entrance ticket to a friend. So for the open conversation, the 45 minutes that will follow the presentations, on your seats you have found some paper and pen. And that is because Miriam and I will be supporting Sarah in the moderation and are available to collect your questions written down if you don't feel comfortable with speaking into the mic. We are using microphones tonight because of the streaming that we wanted to test with the open subtitles for accessibility. For those of you following online, please feel free to write questions in the streaming chat, and we will cater them forward for you in the space. And behind the keyboard, for you to know, there is a lovely person called Kaja. I will also reiterate, as Miriam said, that the streaming is available live only, and it will not be, the recording is not available online afterwards. There is also a latest addition, that is a photographer will be coming by the end of the event to take some photographs. And Mira, that was standing here a moment ago, is available for you in case you don't want to be taken photographs of here. So the anthology that is presented tonight was generously published online with open access for everyone. And you can find it either online through the links that were shared for this event on both the UKS website and the Atelier Kunstnerforbundet website, or if in person in the space, by scanning the gigantic QR code that has been put up at the reception. Last but not least is that only a handful of us are holding a microphone tonight. But as you might imagine, there are many, many more that made this event possible. And I want to thank you for the support to all of those I have been in conversation with while organizing this event. Please allow me here to say simply that you know who you are, because the names are many. But I would like to ask you to bear with me while I actually acknowledge the work and the support from the teams of both UKS and Atelier Kunstnerforbundet and Kunstnerforbundet by naming them. So thank you to Kaja Brekken, Mera Manjit Kaur, Marius Maslanka, Maria Therese Stefansen, Chiara Ratz, Gia G, Lars Sture, Anne Marte Archer, Reiser Porsanger, Kristine Miklestad, Asma Barakat, Ingunn Svannes Almedal, Thomas Tveter, Aira Dive, Åse Bang, and Frida Rusnak. I look very much forward to the presentations and to the conversations that will follow, and please help me welcoming to the microphone Cecilie Ullerup Schmidt.
Hello, everyone. I'm laughing a little bit because I expected that somebody would say who I am. But I will tell you myself. First of all, thank you, Miriam and Martina, for inviting us for this event. And we've been looking very much, and I say we, Lina and I, we've been looking very much forward to come here. I'm an associate professor at the University of Copenhagen in Artes Forum, a research center generously funded by the beer industry New Carlsberg Foundation. I go by the pronouns she, her. And I will be saying we in this lecture throughout. And when I say we, I refer to the working group of researchers and artists who have been contributing to the anthology of infrastructure aesthetics. Put this down a little bit. I have the feeling I cannot see you, but it's very important that it works. I will enjoy your smiles with the running text throughout. I should say maybe also that I come from performance art before I returned to the university to write my PhD. I've been writing about how the Bologna process formed new ways of becoming artist in the past 10 years or so. Yes. So I'm a permanently employed associate professor at the more than 500 years old University of Copenhagen, which has both paved the road for imperialism and formulated things like eugenics, but luckily also taught students to start criticizing colonialism. It's a university that withdraw its investments in the Israeli settler activities on the West Bank due to students' protests in this spring 2024. I will spend the next approximately 20 minutes, so I've introduced myself now, that's over. I will spend the approximately next 20 minutes introducing some vocabulary useful for thinking with infrastructure aesthetics. I'll provide a few examples and a handful of concepts for us all to think with. In 2019, when the visual artist Elia Messiah obtained her Danish citizenship and diploma from the Art Academy in Jutland, On the exact same day, she decided to start the Messiah Foundation, which offers grants for citizenship applications to stateless young people. By demanding gallerists to pay 40% of their earnings from selling her work, demanding 40% to the foundation, she nudges actors who possess economic agency in the art world to contribute to an accumulation of infrastructural support for stateless subjects. At the Documenta 15 event in Kassel, or exhibition in Kassel in 2022, which many of you will know as a reference, but I will explain more. The artist collective Grupa curated and filled the exhibition spaces with collective practices. Artist studios migrated into the exhibition room, kitchens, gardens, and self-organized schools became gathering spaces, printing scenes took center stage, and visa applications for artists traveling from the global south to Germany became some of the main artistic practices. Documenta 15 provincialized the disinterested aesthetic experience of the art object and displayed how the artist collectives were organizing, moving, and living in the Eurocentric exhibition space and its inherited colonial and extractive aesthetics. According to the members of the curating art collective Grupa, the applications for visas for fellow artists working in collectives in the global south became the actual work. As Farid Rakun from the curating collective said in an interview about the process leading up to Documenta 15, very early, when I, in certain moments, became very frustrated by handling contracts, agreements, and wanted to proceed to the artistic part, I was reminded that this is the work that we are doing. Whether it can be called artistic or not is up to us as a group to frame. As I understand the work of Elia Messiah in 2019 and Grupa at Documenta 15, a rethinking of artistic work is formulated. The very creation of conditions for sharing, conditions for relationality, and generous exchange are the artistic practice. Thus, the infrastructures of production, of presentation, and circulation become the material. They replace the canvas, the paint, the marble, the film. What art practices like these have in common is that the artwork overflows its borders by bleeding into the social, the political, and institutional frameworks around it, and at the same time enveloping these frameworks in what is being exhibited. What is on display in such instances is not a delimited artwork that appears in an institutional and social setting. Rather, the display now intervenes into, and even repurposes the setting as part of the work. In the anthology, Infrastructure Aesthetics, that has been announced today, we suggest examining the relation between the artworks and the frameworks that afford them as an infrastructural relation. This relation, we contend, becomes increasingly important as still more artworks no longer just work in an infrastructural setting, but work with infrastructure. The term infrastructure aesthetics is an approach to the aesthetic field stemming from media studies, where the ambition is to describe movements, connections, and cuts, flows between production, articulation, and distribution or reception. It is a perspective disobedient towards border drawings within the aesthetics for us. It's a perspective that we have developed between disciplines and in collaboration. Infrastructure aesthetics covers, first of all, a tendency in our historical present, which we can observe in the arts, as I started with. Artists working with the very infrastructures they're placed within, with funding applications, with distribution of money, with accessibility, with inclusion, or discriminated positions. Sometimes artists working with infrastructures make the perceivers ask, where is the art? Understood as the visual artwork as we knew it. And this image that you see is a process mind map made by Good School, the Jakarta-based collective. And up in the corner you can see a little circle saying, where's the art? Or visible to us. And its infrastructure or infrastructures are often intentionally invisibilized. In the anthology Infrastructure Aesthetics, we point towards the aesthetics, not just infrastructural art, but also a vocabulary to describe how the sensible is organized, both historically and today. It is an analytical lens rather than just a turn or a tendency. Thus, examples in the anthology, and I will not keep on referring to that as a book that you have not read, but I say examples, though, in the anthology also cover the infrastructures of how, for example, statues of kings on horses become monuments in public spaces in the Danish colonial past due to an infrastructure consisting of funding, manufacturing, mediation, ritual, and maintenance of the statues. So there are so many processes going on in order for a statue to become monumental. Which metaphors are here nourishing the terminology of infrastructure aesthetics? The flow of electricity in cables, the cables under the Atlantic, the flow of ships over the Atlantic, the transportation of bodies, the circulation of assets, the conservation of knowledge, the enabling of movement through cables, roads, staircases, algorithms, investments, the enabling of movement in application forms, career networks, cultural archives, the stopping of movement through policies, laws, borders, border control, gatekeeping, defunding, the stopping of movement through notions of legacy, relevance, quality, quantity, qualification, seriousness, scientific ranking. Most importantly, when we talk about infra, the between, most importantly, we talk about infra, the between of structures. So it's not just about structures, but the between of structures, and thus not about the structures themselves. What is interesting for us is that the study of infrastructure is the study of movement. Infrastructures are matter that enable movement of other matter, as anthropologist Brian Larkin has put it. The study of the enabling of movement. What makes some bodies advance and others not? Which aesthetic rationales or aesthetic concepts make some artists move and others not? Which notions of taste and quality make some artists discussed, critiqued and valued, and others not? Cables, trails, roads, borders, shipping, transportation, funding, naming, archiving, remembering, forgetting. It's possible to think that infrastructure aesthetics is a concept that grows out of the logics and logistics of European colonial and extractivist production. Infrastructures are what enables movement in the art world, and maybe I should say in the Western art world. We will maybe be discussing this later on. And when I say art world, yeah, I mean, for now at least, the Western art world. Infrastructures are not innocent, and they are, when they are cut and when they are unveiled, infrastructures are surfacing intentions. Intentions of what is meant to become unforgettable in the curation or the writing of a national art history. Intentions of who's going to become important in literary history according to the publishing houses and the literary scholars and critics. Intentions are flowing across production, articulation, and reception. When we study infrastructures, we study the movements as they become visible. The metro stops and you start thinking about the tracks, the personnel in the train, the coordination of the signals. Power cuts make us think about electricity. When things break down or cut, that's when the infrastructure is surfaced. In my own research and in my own contribution to the anthology, I'm occupied with the artist collectives. That's what I'm doing my research on with generally, historically and today. And in my chapter in the book, I work with examples of the Jakarta-based collectives Goodschool and One Gruppe at Documenta 15. It seems that things would be easier, costs would be lower, discussions would be faster, and authorship would be more identifiable if artists did not group themselves up in collectives. Or artist collectives would thrive more in the art world if it was not built up upon the model of the Western European solo artist. I think with artist collectives as something bulky in the infrastructures of the art world. They are taking up too much time and space. They have no identifiable spokesperson. Their budgets are too demanding. They are bulky in the otherwise smooth infrastructures of the art world. Media scholar Friedrich Kittler has worked with choke points in the infrastructures, or what he says in German, Engpässe. The points where something gets stuck or cannot move on, a bottleneck, if you want, where movement is stopped. Kittler is German, he uses this word of choke points, Engpässe, understood as tight passes in rivers or in the mountains. Kittler's metaphor is based on rivers of data, he's a media scholar, flows of information, and the choke point is where the data must pass a signifier, that which filters data into meaning. The impasse is thereby the passage of translation, legitimization, legibility. The word impasse is used both for choke points in rivers and in the mountains, and it invites me to think with it. I can imagine how an artist collective does not so elegantly or easily slide through an impasse in the mountains, where usually only the agile shepherd and the local sheep or the lonely artist, genius for that matter, pass through the cat-sheep walk. And I don't know if you see it on the image, but I've tried in these actually German mountains that you see it here, I've tried to make some small roots in the mountains with the blue color, and imagine how there might be some impasses here and there for artist collectives. The noun pass marks an access-giving moment in the mountains, a mundane and maybe demanding transition before proceeding to and conquering the high peaks or descending into the green and luscious valleys. But the verb to pass means also to match and resemble the white, cis norms and standards as known through the novel Passing from 1929 by the Danish-American author Nella Larsen, where the mixed-race character Claire Kendry passes unnoticed as white and rich in her marriage as unmarked without difference. As always, when theorists write about infrastructure, I too, after juggling with several metaphors in order to explain infrastructure, hang on to just one. I choose the trails in the mountains and their engpässe in order to explain the infrastructure of the art world and its access points. Why didn't I choose plumbing or blockages of filth of hair instead of trails in the mountains and their engpässe? I guess I prefer the magnitude of mountains, the human ambition of conquering and crossing the insurmountable. Sorry. It's a material impasse for me in my speech. So I prefer the magnitude of mountains, I repeat. The human ambition of conquering and crossing the insurmountable greatness, the promise of sublime views with the scent of the sublime experience when in the mountains, following Kantian aesthetic theory, and dangerous, even deadly gaps. The trails in the mountains as man-made creations and made for some and not others to walk on. It is the mountain trails that interest me. Trails cross borders of owned land, connect trade, give access to territory. Trails are made with intention, providing the route from A to B via C. They suggest certain logistics, and they could have been laid out differently. Thus, the trails, the infrastructures of the art world are also implied with promises and perils. They could have been laid out differently and therefore could have provided access for others. An infrastructural analysis is a decentering of the artwork as we know it, and a forefronting of its often invisibilized relationality, its material and immaterial embeddedness, the production relations, the investors and investments behind, the legacies by which it is privileged, its protection by laws, its connections to people in power, mecenas, critics, curators, its embeddedness in discourse, and its legibility through colonial, racial, ableist, gendered patterns of recognizability. Thus, if I have not said it before, I perceive infrastructures as material as well as immaterial. Infrastructure aesthetics recasts the role of art in a greater ecosystem of the livable, sidestepping the question of where is the art? And replacing it with the question, how do we live together in and through the arts? Thank you.
Is it coming? All right, thank you. My name is Ellegaard. I'm a postdoc researcher at the Artist Forum Research Center at the University of Copenhagen. I've been working with Cecilie for the past 5 years in this center, more or less. Yeah, what else should I say to introduce myself? I've lived in London a great part of my adult life. I've been to art school. I've been doing an MA in visual culture. I've been doing a lot of different things, but now I'm temporarily employed in academia. So now I'll start my things, if I can see here. So first I'd like to thank the organizers, Martina and Miriam. Thanks for all the care that have gone into this work. To this event and the work. And Martina, thank you for acknowledging or stating the importance of acknowledging the ongoing genocides and also the importance of solidarity. I'm finding it a bit, how did you hold this, like this? I would also like to thank Cecilie for introducing many of the ideas that have gone into the infrastructure aesthetics book, and my talk here today is really like a very concrete example of what one of these chapters are about. So my chapter, and how so a more concrete example of how an infrastructural methodology can be used in research and analysis of art, and how it, combined with a feminist perspective, can allow for reflection on questions of bias and discrimination in the art institution historically, because I'm going to be going back to the 70s, but I think it also has relevance for discussions ongoing today. So a little disclaimer along these lines is, because I'm looking at archival material in my research from the 1970s, my presentation might seem to take a very binary approach to gender terms, and I address this at the end of my chapter, but I don't think I'll get to this today. But I suggest that this framing of the infrastructural framework that I work with could also incorporate a more intersectional and more gender diverse approach. But the material talks about men and women in very binary terms. Okay, and just before I begin, to give you a little more context of what I'm going to be talking about. In my PhD, I looked at intersections of exhibition history and political practices of solidarity through archival research into 3 case studies. And one of them, actually the main one, was the women's exhibition Kvindelige Kunstnere, which took place in Copenhagen in 1975. And within this research, I stumbled across the collective project Women Artists Past and Present that I'll be talking about in a minute. And it was shown as part of this larger exhibition. And the exhibition was one of many groundbreaking, collectively self-organized, all-women exhibitions that took place in the 1970s. And a lot of them, and I heard there was one here that I'll hopefully look at tomorrow in the archives, that sorry, I lost my paper. That the aim of these exhibition was to kind of survey women's contribution to art history, but also women's contribution to self-consciousness raising and culture in general. But art historical judgment has continually neglected this exhibition and its significance on the grounds that it did not produce any new artistic breakthroughs and that it lacked quality. So despite the fact that the exhibition was in itself an attempt to break with the male-dominated art world at the time and its notions of aesthetic quality, this wasn't really acknowledged. And here you see some pictures from this exhibition. So I'd like to start my presentation with these two statements that come from the book that's pictured there, Billedet som kampmiddel, the image as weapon, which was published 2 years after the main exhibition as a kind of way to document it and also to document other feminist initiatives from the time. And in the beginning of the book you find the statement, greatness is something which is connected to the attention officially given to that person on that piece of work. The actual inequality consists of different conditions and lack of attention. From these statements, we learn that the women who organized the women's exhibition were clearly familiar with the art historian Linda Nochlин's seminal analysis of the biased attention afforded the white male artist in Western art history. Her essay published in 1971 asked, why have there been no great women artists? And the answer to this, as both Nochlin and the Danish artist knew, was not due to the greatness of individual male artists, but rather to the institutional structures and the societal norms favoring them. So to transform the situation, or to answer the question, one should look not for the forgotten great women artists, but at the mechanisms of the art world and the patriarchal family structure. In other words, these statements that we had before, I suggest, guide us towards looking at how norms of greatness and structures of attention are reproduced and imposed through infrastructural movements and processes. So again, my focus, like Cecilia's, on movement and process, which provide or deny access to resources, distribution channels, and recognition. In the following, I suggest how the collective project, Women Artists Past and Present, did just that. In anachronistic terms, I suggest it can be described as a mapping of infrastructural inattention. But just to give you a little more context on how I understand and use the term infrastructure, and the method of infrastructural inversion that I propose to use. In proposing the notion of infrastructural inattention in relation to mechanisms in the art world, I draw on information scientists Susan Lee Starr and Jeffrey Boker's understanding that infrastructure is not only to be understood as a specific installation or a system of substance, but also includes a dynamic set of relations working within and across various fields, linking conventions of practice, work procedures, and protocols of classification. Through their method of infrastructural inversion, they aim to foreground analytically that which normally disappears into the background. That we could say in the case of art, what makes art appear. And they describe in their book, as they describe in their book, Sorting Things Out, quote, this inversion is a struggle against the tendency of infrastructure to disappear, except when breaking down. So for my purpose of thinking about how artists who travel under the sign of women have previously fared in the infrastructure of art, I combine this approach with Griselda Pollock's notion of feminist desire, which is not about ensuring women artists a place in the canon, but really about questioning art historical investment in the canon. So in other words, if attention to greatness is the norm in art history, then looking at how this norm is applied and reproduced through infrastructural movements and flows, all of which provide or denies access to certain resources, spaces, and positions within and beyond the infrastructural system of art, we can see how infrastructure might privilege and attend to the work of one person whilst ignoring the other. Okay. So The collective project Women Artists Past and Present was initiated by art history student Helen Lassen and the student at the Art Academy in Copenhagen, Hannelise Thomsen, and a student at the School of Art and Craft, Else Kallesø. And the group wanted to include a historical dimension to this overall exhibition. And they were inspired by the many efforts to write women's history in the early 70s, as well as recent sociological research on the working condition of women artists, such as this Swedish anthology, Kvindelige Kunstnere, Women as Artists, by Anna-Lena Lindberg and Barbara Werkmaster, and actually has essays by Norwegian scholars and Danish scholars as well, so it's really a Nordic anthology. So this little group of students were considering how to provide a historical display. And in doing so, they decided against mounting a display of great art by women, as they had seen it in other women's exhibitions, such as there was an exhibition in Stockholm and Malmö called Kvinnfolk. Rather, they departed from the observation that the Art Academy for around the past 50 years had educated as many women as men, but that they, the women, then disappeared. They wanted to know more about the women artists in the immediate generation above them. What was their situation, background, working conditions, and why were they so invisible? Embarking on this investigation into the working conditions and the representation of artists in exhibitions and museum collections, and the critical attention and the overall experience of living women artists, the group sent out a letter to all the female artists in the major artist associations, as well as some artists outside. So altogether, that was 300 women artists, and they were all sent a letter and a 3-page questionnaire in the summer of 1975. Lassen, Kallesø, and Thomsen were themselves in their mid-20s to early 30s at the time, and they set the generational cutoff at the age of 40, which is why the project is also referred to as women artists above the age of 40. The letter also included, the letter also asked for the artists to include a self-portrait as part of their answer, because they wanted not only to know about the women's working situation and their work, but also what they looked like. In other words, instead of focusing on a great display of women's art, the organizers decided to focus on the infrastructures that allow art to be great or prevents it from obtaining this status, as indicated by the questionnaire, which began with the following quote or statement. I went to the National Galleries yesterday and saw Way, Giersing, Hoppe, Manuel Ibsen, Olof Rode, Carl Henning Pedersen, Asger Jørn, Richard Mortensen, Thomason, etc. We would like to investigate the background of this one-sided representation of male artists only. So I suggest that we might understand this investigation into the background as an infrastructural inversion. So looking at that which disappears into the background and tending to this question of the absence of women artists. So rather than staging a protest at the gates of the museum, the point of departure for the questions posed became the logistical, material, and social processes that constitute the infrastructures of art and the gendered norms that condition them. Here are some examples from this questionnaire. Do you receive any public funding? Have you at any time been unable to work due to caring duties, finances, or other reasons? Have your surroundings stimulated your work, appreciated, and so on? So in return, the young organizers received around 50 letters from women artists, and they supplemented these with some interviews. And although these letters were very subjective and had numerous conflicting statements, unsurprisingly, there were several levels at which the women recognized that the flow of attention to them was blocked, particularly in relation to the gendered value of time. The artist Lydia Norrentoft sums it up as follows: "A man's time is precious, a woman's time is worth nothing." So I looked at these letters in the Women's Association's archive where they're all kept. Well, not all, but some of them. Or we can see this inequity is for the most part sanctioned through marriage and the responsibility of domestic work and childcare. As suggested by sculptor Gerda Thune Andersen, it's a matter of choice. She says, well, if you want to become an artist in earnest, you must choose between husband and children and your artistic development. In the long run, these are incompatible. I do not think men have to make this choice. There are also several other parameters where the distribution of attention and recognition to women artists is obstructed. If we consider responses to questions regarding critical attention and sales, the women were also very aware of the gender biases, as sarcastically summed up by Helga Brundinergo. She wrote, "I have always, and that is to say for a long time, almost all my life, been mindful of how our art critics care for the male artist." Or in relation to the sales, this anonymous artist named Eva writes that the people who speculate in art as investment do not buy from women. Art dealers know that, and they say, yes, if only you were a man, then everything would be different, and there's nothing we can do about it. So overall, these gendered hierarchies structured the artist's time, limited their access to materials, to distribution channels, and relegated them to the smaller studio. But also different backgrounds and class privileges played into the experiences of inequality and attention. Some had very supporting families, others did not. But the survey also exposed generational divides between the young organizers and the artists above 40. Notably, most of the elder generation insisted on a gender-neutral understanding of art. For instance, in relation to the idea of having a women's exhibition, Jane Moos wrote, "We must assert ourselves by exhibiting quality." And the artist Karen Margrethe Svensson wrote, "I do not mind exhibiting with women if it's on a fine that is a high level." So these statements suggest that many in the previous generation relied on supposedly neutral terms of classification, such as quality, value, greatness, in their attachment to what art is, and also in their identity as artist. Even as it began to become clearer that historically and continuously these ideas were stacked against the favor of those who were not white male artists. Altogether, the letters reveal, as initially stated, that the inequality consists of different conditions and the biased attention afforded artists of a certain gender. So through this infrastructural inversion, which shifts attention from individual achievements to the background support structures that make such achievements possible or not, the infrastructural inattention to women artists became visible. Although some of the artists would not really admit to these disadvantages, they would, for instance, say that male artists also struggle financially. It might be argued that by now these sociological perspectives of the marginalized position of women artists in the 1970s and before does not reveal biases that have not by now been widely discussed. However, what is interesting, I think, is that this discourse of experiences was put on display in 1975. So in the exhibition space, Kallesøe, Lassen and Thompson presented the results of their investigation on 3 collage boards focused on the themes of economy, family, and critique. On the lower half of these boards, they had chosen selected questions from the survey, and above were some of the quotations from the letters collaged together with paintings, drawings, and photos. The idea behind the collage was to produce a new image with the dual intention to show both the pervasiveness of the historical and socioeconomic conditions, but also to begin to transform them. So the project not only constituted an investigation through infrastructural inversion, but also, that is my argument, a feminist intervention that called out these historical and socioeconomic conditions in order to begin to transform them. But it's also important to note that the organizers did not want to censor or manipulate with any of the material that they had received. So they put all the letters on display so you could see everything. So you could see both the shared and the conflicting views. There was also in the space a collective contribution made by Kvindelige Kunstnerforbundet, the Society of Women Artists that was established in 1916. It featured this goddess of liberty-like figure in the center of the space and the washing line. We could also say that in comparison to the information-heavy collage board, the figure and the obstructing element of the washing line cutting through the sight line perhaps more immediately visualized the burden and obstacle of domestic duties and how it impeded on women's time and thus placed them in a disadvantage in relation to their profession. It might be said that the uneven handwriting on the collage board and the irregular layout of image and text made the boards appear somewhat aesthetically amateurish. And one of the organizers, Hannelise Thompson herself, remembers when I spoke to her, she said, it was kind of sloppy hanging and presentation. But she also recognized that the approach corresponded with the way of exhibiting and reflecting that was prevalent at the time. Indeed, the anti-aesthetics of the women's movement were conceived in resistance to male-dominated norms. Despite such anti-aesthetics, the display did allow for the audience to engage with the material at various levels, either by reading, listening to the audio, or looking at the objects and paintings. The experimental display of sound, image, and text commanded and received attention, as writer and co-organizers of the women's exhibition, Birgit Pontoppidan, has noted in her book about the exhibition, quote, "There were always many visitors who stood and listened to the reading of the artist's letters while looking at the paintings." Oh, should you see? Yeah. Coming to an end. The display of the infrastructural inattention to these women artists not only uncovered forms of systemic gender bias, it also presented the affective attachments, contradictory feelings, and lived experiences of negotiating such bias. Thus, by reaching out to a generation of women artists above them, the young artists created a space for intergenerational dialogue based on solidarity across difference, where attention to greatness, imperative to art historical discourse, was displaced in favor of an infrastructural attention that made public the social and material conditions of women artists at the time. And this mode of investigation, I suggest, just move something. The project received, this project of foregrounding the background of art making, however, has received very little, if any, scholarly attention, well, until now. Presumably, it has been judged amateurish and without value. Indeed, it might be the lack of attention to aesthetic quality in the display that has caused it to sink into relative obscurity. So in conclusion, I would like to propose that we might, in historiographical terms, and thinking more about what infrastructure could mean, inscribe it as part of a shift from a history of institutional critique to one of infrastructural critique, as identified by the late writer and critic Marina Schmidt. And that following this shift in understanding of the significance of this work, we might finally, through the lens of what I have termed infrastructural inattention, be able to identify both its critical potential and value as a mode of artistic and curatorial research which uses data collection and centers experience and dialogical exchange to produce and present useful knowledge about art as art, seeking to transform rather than represent the here and now. Thank you. Adjust or?
Adjust this better so that you can get a
Yes. Yes.
Okay, is this working? Yes, it sounds like it's working. Maybe not my lips, okay. I was just saying that we have a very good crowd here who I know will have many good things to say, both from the perspective of being an artist as well as a representative of an institution. So I just want you to start thinking about your questions. I'm not going to hog the whole time here, but I do think that many of us, both artists and institutional representatives, are very interested in increasingly thinking along the lines of relationships, processes, ecologies, systems, so less about individual artworks and individual artists and the kind of institutional box in which they're placed. So I think it's very interesting. At the same time, I was also, as I was coming here as an institutional representative working on a fundraising campaign for rehabilitating a house that's kind of collapsing, I kept saying, don't be so literal, because I'm like really thinking about toilets and pipes and ventilation ducts, so please excuse me if it gets very literal, but I can rise above, beyond the pipes. But one of the things that I think maybe is, now that we've kind of heard the framing in your first talk, and then a very specific example from the book, I was kind of, as I was reading your chapters in the book, I was thinking about, is this primarily kind of an analytic to think about works in a broader, in all the systems in which they are both produced and perceived? Or is it a kind of way of tracing a different kind of art history in a way? Or perhaps, I mean, very much, I think, for a lot of people, Ruan Grupa's Documenta was like a real shift. So I was just wondering how analytic or kind of infrastructural turn, where do you stand, or is it both?
Should I start? Do you want to start?
You can start.
Okay. So I think I would love to start crediting the work of artists, saying it comes from the artists are doing infrastructural work, and that informs the analytics that we can also have as academics, and thus it is something that is happening in the art, and I think that is always like that with art theory and aesthetic theory, that it starts with the artists and then informs theory, and it's not informing both ways, and theory and practice are going together and so on. But I think it's really also about crediting that tendency, and actually I think also it's important to say this is a word we can think with at this moment. It doesn't mean that artists have not been doing infrastructural work in the 70s or in the 30s, when they were working with their conditions of production and articulation and circulation, and answering back into the structures and participating in how they can appear. So I think that's very important to say, that it's not something just happening now, but it's a vocabulary that is at hand. I mean, it's a war within infrastructures of electricity, right? And I mean, the vocabulary that is at hand in our time is also nudging us to think with infrastructures. So that just comes also from the surrounding society. And
Yeah.
right.
Well, I can say that from the chapter that you heard this long, detailed talk about, it was very much an analytic. It was a way of having, I was studying, so if art history traditionally looks at the art object and the artist biography maybe a little bit, but it's the object of a study is within the frame of the artwork. Then when I was in London, I started working for a small publishing organization called After All, and they had a strand of books called Exhibition Histories, and for me that was really revelatory, because instead of looking at the artwork, we were looking at the moment when art becomes public and how that happened, and at the moment the question was like, how did that change art? How did that exhibition change the way we look at art? So you began to kind of understand the interconnectedness between that moment of reception. But then I also had to do research on some of these exhibitions, and then I thought more and more what was interesting was all the background information, like what was the budget like? Did the artist make the work there? Did they travel? All these kind of questions of logistics and infrastructure, and who gets to do this and who gets to do that, and how does it work? So then joining the Artist Forum group, and then there was this vocabulary of infrastructure. Again, for me, it was again realizing that it's also a bit limited only to look at what was presented in the exhibition, but what actually ends up in the exhibition again refers further back. So I think I don't know if that answers the question, but that's how I perceive it, as something that is generative for expanding the understanding of what is important to look at.
I had a kind of follow-up question to how do you delimit in a way? I mean, I think that was very much after Ruan Grupa's Documento. It was very much, like, where was the art? Why was there no attention to the artwork? Everything, there's I think also at the same time a kind of longing to, at the same time that a lot of artists are, of course, also dealing very much with materiality. That's another trend, or something happening, I think, where people are very attentive to very, almost like the kind of maybe the inverse of a material, I don't know, the infrastructural. But how do you, in that example, you're looking at this exhibition, there are discrete things in that show. Where do you, because I think in your introduction you talk about everything that's downstream and everything that's upstream. You kind of want to, in this analytic, you want to be able to absorb, in a way, all the exclusions that have determined what you're looking at, which can be, in a way, an infinite process. So where do you start and where do you stop, and how do you make the cut, in a way?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and problematic as well in this way of working. But with this very, I like to go into details, I get very sucked into details, so also maybe it's easier to answer this question to just stay within my example, where I really tried to say there is a patriarchal society or a structure of the patriarchal family infrastructure that determines who does what, and that was so kind of one infrastructure, and how does that go into the other infrastructure, which was then looking at how the artwork worlds in terms of who gets to be reviewed and who gets to have a show and who gets the money. So that was, in my mind, at least one way of delimiting this endless possibility of the context that could influence in one way or another.
Do you have any?
Yes, I think to me it is important to say that within the department that we are in Arts and Cultural Studies, a lot of attention is being given to the reception of the artwork. So that's what people also, although we say infrastructure, aesthetics, people are very interested in what the artwork does to the viewer. So aesthetic experience, what is this art object doing to me? This individual consumption of the artwork. So it didn't disappear, right? Just to say. And it's often when we talk about these interests, our interests in conditions of producing and in how yeah, then people are, but what about the artwork? It's a little bit like, where is the art? But what about the artwork? And it's not that it's not there. We're just not so interested in it. And so many others are still. So we didn't lose it. It's just it's another strategy. It's another methodology. And then I want to say, because I've been occupied with the term production aesthetics for quite a while. So that's especially the production and not so much the reception and not so much actually also the articulation. But luckily, in order to think infrastructure aesthetics, I'm in collaboration with others. I cannot think this alone, and I think that's actually super important, that infrastructure aesthetics demand collaboration and also transdisciplinarity. So we are this Artist Forum research center funded by the Carlsberg Foundation with 18 million Danish kroners. So we've been plus 15 people collaborating, thinking together across media studies, comparative literature, art history, artistic practices of visual artists, anthropology, modern cultural studies, performance studies. And I think that's also because we had time and money and many people around, that it's possible also to develop this kind of thinking. So it demands also further on, I think, also to work with this term, also collaboration. And I like to think of this as a good obstruction or demand from a theory. Also to funding bodies.
I'm going to ask one more question, so start thinking about yours, and then we can chat. And my last question, in a way, has very much to do with this, as you say, the kind of structure that enables certain kinds of thinking and collaboration to happen. And I think, the museum is increasingly in crisis, and the kind of its foundation on colonial, patriarchal, ableist, misogynistic, racist, et cetera, system is increasingly, I think, something that people and artists think about. And so I was wondering, in a way, and also thinking about Documenta and this example in which, it kind of, that Documenta sort of brought Documenta to an end, in a way, or brought about its collapse. So what, for those of us also working in institutions, can we house this stuff, is the question, or is our infrastructure too overwhelming to actually, what's your take on that?
Okay, I think actually my first, like, what are we to do? It really reminds me of the question of white people who have listened to analysis of racism for a while, saying, but what can I do as a white person? And it's like, well, sit with it, have a problem, talk with others. And it's maybe I also think museums should also collaborate, share their collections with more, circulate more than exhibit, maybe. I don't know. So also to think of new collaborative structures, less national structures, be more like.
No, just adding on that, thinking about the logics, the structure, how you work, and what are the access points to this institution, and so how can you house it, or is it maybe even is it capable of housing it? I guess is sort of my question, because they do, having also worked in a museum, it's an incredibly slow moving. It's not like you can just like start collaborating.
It's a heavy infrastructure.
Collapse departments, and it's like a pretty inflexible. And not to mention the way it's funded and the way it's organized, the archive is organized. There are a lot of, so it's not just about, I think, a change in mindset, although that certainly does help.
But I think it's definitely a change of practice that needs to be implemented, right? That's thinking about how, I don't know, what, I don't know.
But it's also interesting because I was asking about the exhibition you spoke about. I was saying, well, it's interesting. It was in an institution, and you were saying, well, they rented the space. It was self-organized, which I think is an important fact. But at the same time, of course, they wanted it in that space, right? So in order for it to, I guess, jar the structure in a way. So it speaks to that as an historical example, but I don't.
Yeah, but maybe also, I mean...
we talked about, actually we had this,
Mm-hmm.
we were thinking about this institution and
Mm-hmm.
how one thing that the institution has done recently is to change the format of exhibitions. So I'm looking at you, Miriam, from solo exhibitions to group exhibitions, and so that's a different way of structuring the way attention is kind of distributed among how many artists during the year. So that's a very concrete example of how you can work with these initiatives. So you had a question in regard to that, Cecilia.
Yeah,
If we can ask,
we ask maybe
Talk
back to the host. How the artists have been reacting to this invitation to not be solo, and also maybe also funding bodies or a municipality or something like that, if there are opinions, and with the overall question also. Who can afford to go collective?
So I should start by saying I didn't decide the new structure. The way it happened was, and I've been thinking a lot actually about how it could happen, because UKS can be surprisingly conservative, and the solo exhibition, of course, is a very understandable format. And we have been working here for a very, very long time on providing the best possible financial and institutional framework for exhibiting artists. And giving that up is a little scary, because we know that now that we're doing something different, we also have no idea what we're doing, and it will definitely be a more stressful and less seamless, in as much as it's been, it's also not seamless, but less seamless process than it has been before. And I want to say that it happened, sorry, this will be I'll try to keep it as short as I can, but but I have to say that this came about partly because there was a choice to move into this building, which has been which in many ways is a great choice, but has also heavily compromised our staff capacity and running costs. Because of the delays in moving into this building, we decided to spread the program we had over longer. Not spread it, it was because we were delayed in opening, so we kind of had to push things. And suddenly we had a pot of money that we usually use for the fees for jury members for the open call that we weren't using, and that allowed us to put down a working group in the board that could look at other models for doing program. So there were all these circumstances that made this labor possible, because at UKS we don't do anything without paying people, because we're a union. So then there was a group that worked on that for a long time. Now I forgot the question. What?
How did after all that work, how did people react to it?
Yeah. Okay, so when I just moved to Norway, I was very worried about how people would receive stuff I did here. And then a staff member, a colleague of mine, said, "Don't worry, they won't tell you if they hate it." So I've heard very little negative. I've had very little negative response from the field, but I imagine that there's lots of people sitting out in corners being very angry about this. But maybe I don't know. But honestly, I haven't had any real negative feedback. I've had positive feedback. The decision has also been about looking at the ecology, the field here, and seeing there is actually quite a lot of solo exhibitions possibilities, there's not enough, but it's an established format, and what maybe isn't so much here is other forms of curatorial experimentation that allow for different ways of working together. And what we know, there's very little we know about the new program, but we know it's not a group show. We know it's something else. And for the people who we've now finalized the open call, and for the people who have, the artists, we also wanted to, and I want to say this actually, the artists have been very positive about it. And what they've been positive about actually is being given a space to do things that they don't find space for elsewhere. So for example, someone said, we have solo practices, they applied as a duo. We have solo practices, but the system only allows, and that's what the system allows us to have. But what we really want to do is work as a duo. Someone else said, I've had this practice now for a while and I feel very established in it. I've been doing like one big project a year, but I don't want to be that artist. I don't want to be commodified, but there's no space for me to do something else now because this is what people expect. So I think our kind of excitement is about trying to be a space for things that maybe are difficult to have exist elsewhere. Sorry, that was quite long-winded. I hope I answered the question.
Yes. So now other questions can come from the audience, right?
I know they're out there.
Maybe if someone in the audience hates the new program, they can tell me now.
To your face.
Thank you. Please bear with me because I have no idea what I'm going to say. I just have many thoughts around. Maybe I can start by saying that I also work at an art institution. It's very recent. It's my first institutional gig. I come from a very artistic slash curatorial experimental practice, and then I got this job, and then I'm dealing a little bit with the same problematics on how to break the infrastructure or how to think anew. And then I think I really like what you said about we have no idea what the program is going to be like. And I think that's part of, personally, if we don't gamble, then we are not able to create change, right? So then I think actually being brave enough to stand in a place of not knowing what's going to happen, because actually we don't know that in life, no? We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Then change is possible, and then new structures appear. But then I also had a thought regarding how do we match, like, because the institution seems to be so formatted, and then the artistic practice is so creative, and then why can't we apply creation or creativeness into an institutional framework, right? Because then it seems to be super stiff, and then that's where I feel there is an imbalance when we want to, you know, like, let the artistic expression come through, right? And I think also from both your presentations and the conversation, I'm curious if you have any, like, how do we land all this historical background into this reality and the present moment, and in a practical way, no? Because then, of course, the theory is there and it's massive, right? And then I feel like when we look at that, it can be overwhelming if we are starting to think in practical terms. And also, the last thing I'm going to say, because then I don't want to take too much space, but is that I believe in micro actions or small changes, right? That gradually will become bigger as we go. So then sometimes, of course, if you want to change the whole structure of a museum and then you start thinking big or of an art space, right? Then you think that you have to make big changes, and then actually just a simple gesture, a simple that is big in the long run because you are changing the format of something. But just starting somewhere mini that can create also an impact. And okay, one last thing. No, I also think Sorry, I am not stealing the panel. But I also think that, no, I lost my thread of thought. I'm gonna just cut it there, and then maybe you have, maybe we can come back to my question if you have some examples of like how to implement this in practical terms.
You did at some point mention that it would be interesting to talk about infrastructural curating, so maybe this is the time, or it seems like that's what Tatiana is in part getting at. There's a lot there to pick up on, but that's at least one thread.
I don't know, your question made me think of another topic that we've been working on that also featured in my talk and a little bit in yours about gatekeeping, because if you are in an institution, you have power. You can decide your program. I mean, with others, but within the institutional framework. But there are these. So I think what I pick up is you're talking about the micro actions, and we had some examples in relation to gatekeeping that we, I know, in. So we had a seminar at the National Gallery called Gatekeeping. No, quality control, the history and legacy of gatekeeping in the arts, or something like that. But some of the small suggestions was, oh God, I'm getting a bit tired, but I feel like there were different.
The care writer?
Yeah.
Having a care writer. I mean, what we heard also in the beginning, Miriam suggesting how we talk together.
Yeah.
So there is something about providing some vocabulary for how to be together in the spaces, how to accommodate guests. And then, well, do you have another example?
No, I was also thinking about how to facilitate the space. How are the chairs, if it's an event organized? Or, yeah, exactly what kind of...
We always recommended by one... feminist artists from who has been very active in Denmark since the 70s, Kirsten Dufour. Every time she comes to the university, she says, "Replace the chairs in circles." She's like, "Why are you still having your chairs like this? You're dealing with feminist art history. You're reading feminist theory, and then you're still sitting in these rows." Yeah. But. Another thing that I think I have a carte blanche because I'm not a curator and I'm not from visual arts. I'm from performance art and performing arts, and I'm a scholar in cultural studies. So I dare to just give good suggestions for curators as an expensive consultant. No, free consultant. No, but I think. Informed by Black feminist theory, like by Tina Kampt or Denise Ferreira de Silva, practices of listening could be something that it sounds maybe easy, but actually to listen to the field rather than be very inventive. Like there has been you could say a turn for the past 20 years of the curator as an artist, right? Very, very inventive curators, very strong curation. And I think with Documenta, it also became obvious that curation is, for good and for bad, often based on friendship, like generous friendship or small friendships. That's the gatekeeping, right? But listening more to the field, I think, is something that could be productive, and something that when you want to think about micro practices, one thing that I've been listening to in my research is, or I've been observing with a colleague, Anna-Mia Gaunka, who's not here today, who's also from our research group, to separatist practices of collectives of racialized artists and cultural workers, so where they group up separatistically. Examples in Norway that we've been working with are B16, a dancers collective of Afro-Nordic dancers and choreographers, and Queendom, performing arts group. And there are several examples also in Denmark, Marronage, the Union, and I think they are actually, as collectives, suggesting how to organize differently and also how to provide knowledge production and art in different ways. And that is, in a way, speaking into, maybe you could say, the group show or the curated show where racialized artists would be tokenized as the one racialized person in the whole show, and they suggest to be many. And that you can think of both in terms of taking space and providing another kind of representation, but you can also, as has our colleague Anna-Mia Gaunka in the anthology that you can download for free, think of it as an affective infrastructure. So you create for yourself, not so much for the art world, an infrastructure that provides a safer space to talk in about experiences of racism here in the Nordic region. But also just to say, I think that these kind of suggestions also are worth listening to and actually offer themselves as a already curated group show.
I was thinking, I wrote down the question that you can ask yourself, like, who do these infrastructures serve? Like, whatever infrastructure you have and also how you think of it, you know, is there access for everyone? When we place an event in the evening, who does it then allow to come? Well, it allows people who are working during the day to come, but it maybe allows people with caring responsibilities, they might be difficult for them to come. So I think it's just also about thinking, who are you allowing to turn up at certain points and who are you not allowing to turn up? So maybe also scheduling at different times, not always a specific time. It could be another micro example that would allow the infrastructure to work in a different way and maybe allow other people to come to the space.
I just want to remind the shy among us that you can also write down your question on a note. There are notes placed around, little notepads and pens, and then we'll read it out. I hate asking questions in public, for example. Sorry, I could have come to you.
I just want to start off with a comment in that this event is the most seen at an event in Norway that I've ever felt, with the different seating, the low lighting, and that screen, whilst it's a tiny adaptation, makes this event hugely accessible to me. And it just reinforces how far we have to come, or how far we have to go in Norway to have equity and access. And I was taken by the metaphor of the mountains that was used, and thinking that's quite an ableist kind of metaphor. So that was quite interesting. And then also the comment about the women's exhibition. And as somebody who identifies as disabled and neurodivergent, the structures, I'm just wondering about the structural aesthetics, or the structure that generally, like the invisible structural barriers that keep the representation of disabled, neurodivergent, chronically ill people out of the art scene, particularly in Norway, and why aren't we represented, and how we generally curate in our own likeness, and so, you know, who is in the position of power, and that comment about who is not in the room, and about programming and making things, and quite often it's like, oh, we haven't got the money, but actually I wonder if people have got the will to do that, to make those changes. And yes, I come from a privileged situation of having been part of the UK disability arts scene, so the barrier is quite high. And so I'm just wondering what structural changes can we effectively do in the low-hanging fruit to make things more accessible, to increase representation. I mean, it's still quite sad that, you know, like 1975 for that exhibition, and it feels like the disability arts representation in Norway is not even there yet. So I'm just wondering, how can we adapt and change like the structural aesthetics here in a practical, easy way?
I just want to say thank you for the comment, first of all, and the analysis of the space today, and the good questions. I also want to acknowledge your observation about the mountains as super ableist. I also, when I say they remind me of Kantian aesthetics, that's not positive to me. That's a way of saying a dominant understanding of how art is that we have inherited since the Enlightenment and throughout post-Enlightenment thought.
I think it's a very good question, and I think it requires, a full research report to look at what are the practical things that we can do, what are the low-hanging fruits. I've been looking at this, archival material. I haven't been thinking, what are you going to do here today? So I don't want to come up with something on the spot, but just thinking of that, the methodology at the time was, in a way, to share the experience. What are you? Where are the places that you experience that you can't access something? What are the obstacles? By,
I think it's
organizing collectively, which you are already doing.
I mean, I think that as an institution or as an academic, a suggestion can be to call for and collect care writers. So for those of you who don't know what a care writer is, it's a writer that can either be written from the institutional side about how you provide, for example, you would give it to an artist, say, when you arrive in the space, there will be a person accommodating you into the space and explaining you where things are. There will be a dressing room for you and a bed to lie on. There will be water and hot water disposal. You will have meals. Our pronouns are this and this. If you have any kinds of needs, further, just write us. And then there would be like other things, but this would be like the beginning of it. And then there are examples of care writers written by artists. When I arrive in the situation as a person, and neurodivergent, a person with neurodiversity, I will, in this, let's say, theater production, it's very much used in performing arts. I will not be able to answer emails every morning, but I prefer to answer only on Thursdays due to my preferences. Or it can be about lighting, it can be about sound, and these kind of writers, I started, but I will not promote myself as somebody who completed it, but I started collecting a little bit of care writers, and I think that could be really nice online to have an archive of care writers to think with and research in and find some good advices in. So not always to ask the disabled person or the racialized person or the trans person to give us the answers, but start collecting good or better practices. One example.
Hi. Actually, before I ask my question, which is a little bit apropos, I just want to second that and thank UKS and the small institutions. I'm from a very big institution, which shall remain nameless, and Kunstnerforbundet for kind of leading the way and making good examples. Absolutely. So, I'm an architecture person, architectural historian, so this is more of a disciplinary question. But also in the field of architecture history, maybe we don't call it an infrastructural turn, but there's definitely been a shift in the way that people write histories, right? Away, like in art history, away from biography and object-centered readings and approachings to something else. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. We have feminist critiques, decolonial approaches, actor network theory, like media theory. There's a lot of reasons why the field of architecture history has also been changing. But I think for my field, one of the key reasons why a lot of us are starting to think more infrastructural, if you will. I mean, meaning that we're looking at kind of the things in between that allow an object to exist, is really a question of materiality and provenance of those materials, which comes directly out of the climate crisis. So it becomes a very pressing concern where these materials come from. So this is more kind of an open question to you. Where does the climate crisis and more of these hard infrastructures fit in to infrastructural aesthetics? Yeah, I think that was my question.
Do we?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
It's a good question. I mean, to be really honest, nobody in our group has been occupied with that. We have another research cluster called Art and Earth. That's where they're doing that. I mean, but I would say maybe one example that goes a little bit into the direction also of the question of materiality and where do the materials come from is our colleague Amalie Skovmøller, who's an archaeologist, an art historian, who's working with white marble. So the extractivist practice of taking out white marble that will never be replaced again or grow out of mountains and make something eternal and monumental out of that white marble as a colonial extractivist practice that she, together with our colleague Matthias Danbold, art historian, that they are analyzing in relation to men on horses and sculptures of white marble.
I don't know if it responds to the climate, well, to the materials of but the art world is, heavily relying on shipping artworks around the world to commercial fairs and to exhibition loans, and so, they're always circulating around in a kind of unsustainable way. But and one of the things that have also been pointed out as unsustainable is that every time you ship an artwork, you make a new crate that is made of wood and padding and stuff. So I know of an initiative that has tried to, collaborate amongst these commercial galleries and I don't know if it's museum as well, but to reuse the crates. It's a tiny small thing, but it might reduce the kind of amount of materials that you end up spending on moving things around. But
I remember. And thinking about transportation, there was also, was it the curator and Nora Sternfeld who was talking about copying great artworks, instead of traveling all of us to Louvre to see Mona Lisa, just make really good crafters copy Mona Lisa and put it out.
And that could also,
so there is no transportation of Mona Lisa or Picasso or whomever's works. And there is no flying to the metropoles to see this one artwork.
Yeah.
Because people are really good at copying and skilled.
But I don't know if it'll work in architecture.
We're going to take one last question.
Heavy copy.
There's a question down here. And this will be our last question because we're out of time, sadly.
Hi, I actually don't have a question, but I have I actually have comments and suggestions because I was sort of trying to understand when Tatiana raised the question about artists are more creative and the institutions have a more different way of working, and in front of me I can of course see examples in Oslo and in Denmark that have managed to kind of break those structures and really reach out in different ways. And I was wondering, like, why isn't that institutions could rather think more of public programming when they do exhibitions or when they do shows? Why is it that it's frowned upon to bring your own curator into an institution, which is absolutely eyed upon, right? Like, you can't do that. If you're working on a project with a curator for like a year or two and you both apply to an institution together, that's, unfortunately, that's a problem. And I don't want to absolutely sound narcissistic right now, but I will give an example of the recent show that I did myself. And and I have to say, no, it's because your presentation is making me really realize what my project ended up reaching or doing is when we truly do dissemination the way dissemination should actually be done, which is if you want to reach out to a public that is not necessarily artists and friends, we have to go to places that we might not be comfortable to go to. You know, we might have to put the brochures at a restaurant or at a shop, or sort of really kind of, you know, like go into doing that act. The only example that is sort of also coming into my head is I was really following a trampoline house, which is not, which it's not functioning anymore, or like a part of it is functioning.
It's reformulated. It's still existing,
Okay.
but with another board.
So these were just some comments, because when I did my exhibition at Intercultural Museum, which is a local neighborhood museum in Grønland here in Oslo, went with a curator, pitched the project, and it was very transparent, and the senior curator at the institution welcomed the project, and they really supported the whole work in terms of, yes, it's a solo project, but at the end of the day, I did have 3 people welcomed into the project to make it more collaborative or collective. So I think there are possibilities to sort of do it. It's just how much do we actually really want to do it, you know? Yeah, sorry.
How much do we actually really want to do it? Question of the day. Martina, do you want to say anything before I hand over the microphone to the speakers?
Thank you for the engagement, and we'll be here without my thumb.
Is there anything you 3 would like to say in conclusion?
Thank you for the questions and comments, and we can continue with informal conversation in the bar or here.
Yes, we'll be open for chatting and l'esprit d'escalier, as my former colleague Stefan Håndlykken always said, for another hour. So please hang around. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you to Kunstnerforbundet, Atelier Kunstnerforbundet, and Martina. And thank you so much to the 3 of you and to everyone in the room.
Thank you.